In the finance industry, you're very competitive. Like everyone is trying to compete with each other unknowingly. And even within your team, you're trying to get the next promotion, the next whatever. Everybody's like competing with each other. I want to get more visibility. I want this person's not pulling their weight, right? I think that conflict is very healthy if the manager and the team creates a very supportive, psychologically safe environment for people to speak up. It starts with the manager owning their truth, owning their challenges, owning their vulnerability as well, to create a safe space for their team members to speak up.
And I think being really practical about this, right? A lot of time when we coach leaders, I realize one big thing is we have assumptions. We assume that's how they like, right? So sometimes the even basic thing is, let's ask the question, how would you like things to be communicated to you, right? And then figuring out within reason, how can you adapt some of the things? You know, in the old days when it's major organizational announcement, right? There's now technology that you can cut long town halls into 1 minute snapshots. So I would say go above and beyond. One is to ask, recognize people are different, don't assume, and then actually use technology to facilitate the different ways. And some people say, I just want to listen to this at 7 p.m. where my kids go to bed. Absolutely. Give them the room to make those choices.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise and Shine. This is our mini-series called Manage Who?
Manage who?
that joke never gets old. But anyway, this is where we collect the questions that you listeners, audience have actually submitted to us through our forms, our social media comments, and we put this together to get the right folks on panel to answer your burning questions and hopefully guide you on your career path or trajectory or whatever answers or direction you are trying to seek. And joining me today is...
Yeah, Dawn, I realized that you forgot to introduce yourself. You were so excited to tell everyone that we're...
Like familiar face. So if you actually don't recognize me by now, my name is Dawn, otherwise known as Budget Babe and author. Now I can put on that label. And joining me on this series is my handsome co-host, Alex.
Thank you. Today I got extra adjective in front of my name.
Adjective.
Thank you. Right. So I'm Alex Loh. You can find me on socials, Alex Loh, your growth mindset coach. And I am actually also an author. No, I authored 2 children's books. Next time I bring you.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, next episode.
One on stress management and another one on identifying your unique talents.
Right. So we 2 authors today have turned podcast hosts in a, what do you call it? Career transition? Career transformation.
Okay, enough about us.
That is not the topic for today.
Sorry.
We should focus on our guests first before we go into the questions that you guys have submitted. Joining us on set is Susan and Nicole. And Susan, could you do a quick introduction of yourself to our guests?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm Susan Chen. I'm the CEO and founder of CoGrow, which is a boutique HR strategy consulting and fractional HR. We support startup and scale up, growing into the next stage of their journey. Also an author, I wrote a book called The Death of Best Practices. So I don't believe there's a playbook to answer the questions you have on management, but let's figure it out together.
Yeah, let's. And Nicole.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Nicole Lee. I spent about 13 years at a top bank before leaving it for a FinTech startup, which was a transformative chapter of my life. Now I am hosting my own podcast called You Never Know. Started my own company as well, offering different services like consulting and coaching as well. So really glad to be here. A mom of 1 daughter as well. So yeah.
Okay, so in the questions that we've gotten so many from you guys, and please feel free to keep them coming. But in today's episode, we've actually curated 7 questions that fall into pretty much what we call the same broad themes, which is along the idea of managers handling generational divides and suffering burnout from that. And the first question we have.
An alias, Corporate G, right? I don't know whether it's a she, he, or they. This person's a manager in finance, age 35. Right. So the question is, there is conflict amongst the team or within the team. What strategies can be implemented to foster collaboration among employees from various generations?
You know, this collaboration word, right, is such a big word in finance or in big corporations because everyone wants to foster collaboration between teams. But I think even I was guilty before. When we say collaboration, we try to force people to fit into this collaboration more, or to fix people from different functions to actually come together, when actually collaboration is about understanding one another better. And when I saw the two words that stood out for me was collaboration and then generational divide, right? I mean, the fact that you already think of generational as a divide means that you already labeled someone as boomers, millennials, Gen Zs. Then immediately you think Gen Zs are lazy, right? Or you think millennials are very entitled. Boomers like, they don't care anymore about
Old school, right?
Old school,
Cannot
right?
change,
exactly.
right?
But you put, I think even myself before, we put all these labels on people so that we actually automatically already block ourselves from actually having collaboration with someone else. And I was guilty of that too. So I would say that the first point is to have a greater understanding of yourself and the individuals in their team, regardless of the generation. Because a boomer can be super creative, a Gen Z can be super hardworking, a millennial can be like the next leader of the company, right? So I think it's to drop the labels, not stereotype people. And I was guilty before as well, but not stereotype people and understand people for people.
I love it. I think absolutely, like dropping the label is number one.
Yeah.
And then it's how do you sit down? I think the only label that I love is recognizing we're all human, right? So how do we have a human conversation about what is working, what's not working? And then I think most importantly, then it's a way to agree on the future ways of work. Right. So that agreement, sitting down, thinking about work as a collaborative, I think that's a great way to take a practical step to move forward, but stop labeling people around the generations.
And when these conflicts happen, do you guys think that it's good for the manager to encourage them to air their views?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I think that, particularly in the finance industry, you're very competitive. Like everyone is trying to compete with each other unknowingly. And even within your team, you're trying to get the next promotion, the next whatever. So everybody's like competing with each other. I want to get more visibility. this person's not pulling their weight, right? I think that conflict is very healthy if the manager and the team creates a very supportive, psychologically safe environment for people to speak up. Because conflict in different teams can have very different effects. For some, it's very constructive. You can say, hey, Alex, you told me how you feel, told me what's happening at home. I understand that, or you're struggling with this person or, this topic, right? Then that creates very healthy conversations. But if it's not psychologically safe, what happens is that people will start to get stressed, anxious, and that's why they feel all these things as well. So it really depends. And I think it starts with the manager. It starts with the manager owning their truth, owning their challenges, owning their vulnerability as well, to create a safe space for their team members to speak up.
So in reality, would it be possible with the fast-paced environment, with deadlines, KPIs? Yes, I want to understand each person individually. I'm removing the labels of the generations, and I want to provide that safe space. But there is not much leeway for me to do that, right? So how could this actually be rolled out?
For managers say there's not a lot of leeway also creates this challenge in the space, right? Because sometimes we think these conversation has to be drawn out big moments versus can we find micro moments of reflection to have these conversations, right? Even that is a 10-minute reflection. I always say find your existing cadence and shift how you use them. We say we're busy with KPI. I bet you sit down at least 2 hours a week talking about work itself, what's not working. So we'll say you've got 2 hours you've allocated for KPI. Out of that 2 hours, take 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. We're going to shift the conversation and recognize what is the one thing we can do differently to move the dial. Because I think without thinking about the outcome of work, people also like, why do we need to collaborate? We're all achieving KPI, right? Versus actually, this is blocking us achieving. So how do we take those smaller steps rather than feel like we need to spend half day, go to an island, and then talk about problems? No, let's find the micro moment in your existing cadence to really start shifting the conversation.
I think it's a very real scenario you mentioned, Alex. It's a very good point because in the corporate world, you can get so stressed and so bogged down with deadlines, timelines, projects that you actually don't have time to reflect on yourself. But if I were to give one piece of advice is as a manager, take time for yourself, regardless of how crazy the environment is. And I've been there before, corporate and startup. I had to force myself to take time for myself to reflect on what I've done, what I've said to the team, and how the team reacted. Only then and only then, regardless of your KPIs, your objectives, whatever it is, can you then make a change for yourself and then for your team as well.
And on that note, I'll then put in question number 2, which comes from Susie, a 41-year-old manager. And she's asking, how can managers then align the diverse communication preferences or styles of the different age group? So not just generation now, just different age groups, right? What can managers actually do to try and align that?
Similar to generation, age group falls under the same labels where we think that someone older is not as open, someone younger requires more active communication. And I think there are certain underlying traits and values that actually underpin a lot of the communication. And I want to draw the similarity to dating. Right. If you actually are dating someone, you also don't want the other person to change for you. And then at the same time, you bend over backwards to change for the other person, because it could happen in your team as well, where you're both trying to change for each other. And what happens is the manager loses themselves and your team members end up becoming someone that you don't even know is real. So both sides, it creates a lose-lose situation. So I would say is recognize people for people regardless of the age, and the underpin it with, for me, it's very important, transparency, integrity, and clarity when it comes to communication. And then your styles can vary, but the underlying values, they remain.
And I think being really practical about this, right? A lot of time when we coach leaders, I realize one big thing is we have assumptions. We assume that's how they like, right? So sometimes the even basic thing is, let's ask the question, how would you like things to be communicated to you, right? And then figuring out within reason, how can you adapt some of the things? And just to plug in, we have a lot of technology. I'll give you an example, right? You know, in the old days, when it's major organizational announcement, right? There's either a long email or there's a long town hall. There's now technology that you can cut long town halls into 1-minute snapshots, right? You can change that into presentation. You're actually able, if you're intentional, to think about the people consuming the same information differently. So I would say go above and beyond. One is to ask, recognize people are different, don't assume, and then actually use technology to facilitate the different ways. And some people say, I just want to listen to this at 7 p.m. where my kids go to bed. Absolutely. Give them the room to make those choices.
Agree. I think also, while these are coming from the managers, every worker, every executive also needs to take on that control and direct their career. Because like, I'll use myself as an example. I've worked with bosses and managers who communicate in ways that are very different from how I prefer to communicate. And I learned very well with visuals and text, but less so if you just tell me things without something for me to even look at so that I remember and internalize it. So when I was working with a manager who liked to talk a lot.
Yeah, I get it.
Right, you get where I'm going with this. 70% of them will be completely lost. I would not remember what she needed me to do. So what I would ask for is, before the meeting, I would say, can I have like an agenda? And then as she talks, I will read the agenda. Okay, she's moving on to the next. So if she doesn't create that visual for me, I'll create that for myself.
Exactly. I think it's take the control back, because a lot of times, especially if your boss is very senior, they're not going to change for you, right? And then you have to accept the reality that they're not going to adjust to you. And it also takes a lot of self-awareness of the boss to then, adjust, adapt a bit. But I think what you did was very good in terms of, if that person is not giving you what you need to absorb, then you need to create it for yourself.
Correct. So to Susie, maybe if you're feeling burnt out, then the suggestion would also be to tell your team to ask you and ask it from you, or ask them, if you don't find that certain communications are working now, then please feel free to ask me for it and we can work on a change.
And my team is a great example, to your point, right? So my team would say, can I record this meeting? Like, even as face-to-face. And again, I go back to use technology. We'll forget. These days, not invasive. She asked me, I said, absolutely, right? So she has a recording of it. She can go back and take the snippet that's helpful. So is that meeting in the middle, right? To how do you work together to support that communication to be clear?
And this really would then be a great example of collaboration as well, right? Because when you ask questions and when you encourage questions to be asked, that's when you don't have those assumptions and you're breaking that communication barrier or divide.
I mean, I think it's a great way to think about communication in the moment, right? To be understood, but also preparing for that future. So again, using technology help us to capture, a lot of us now starting using note takers. We typically use the same one. They gotta record your pattern, record the way that you talk and think and summarize. One, they can give multiple output, but second, some can give you feedback. They can say, hey, Susan, based on the transcript, you are actually not very clear about this point, right?
Or you're talking too much.
Yeah,
or you're asking
exactly.
too little
80%
questions.
of the time you are talking or you have ignored 3 questions. So I think goes back to, Nicole's point, even with self-awareness, how do you use the tools that's available for us to actually help us to reflect and learn? And again, start looking at patterns so you think about the future of your communication as well.
Yeah, I was at coffee the other day with someone and she was clipping this tool, like she just clipped it here and it's to record whatever that we said so that it can transcribe and then turn it into a mind map.
Yeah, I love how technology can do all this a lot faster than us doing
Yes,
it
of
manually.
course.
Absolutely.
So please send me that. And if you guys have any ideas, please put it into the comments so we can also become more productive and
Absolutely.
efficient.
And importantly, I think it allows you to be present. So especially if you're in the office, you know, like we're talking here, right? We need to be present so that we understand what each other is saying and you can be really focused here. If you're taking notes and listening like most people do on the call, Zoom and right? You can't be present in the moment. And I like, Dawn, what do you say again? You're just busy taking notes, right? So it allows you to be fully present.
I agree. And on this note, I also realized that the technology is doing that for you. It's going to make communication a lot easier for everyone.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so we have a lot of questions to go through as well. The next one is from Ryan. You want to take it,
Let
Alex?
me take that. Okay, question 3 is from Ryan, 34. This is the question. Getting people to actually do their job, checking on their work, it has made me feeling burnt out, or it has burnt me out. How do I address potential conflict that might arise within my team? So I think there are 2 questions here, right? So this Ryan feels like it's difficult to have to a certain extent, could be micromanaging, right? And how then does he also address the potential conflict that might arise within teams, which I think probably there's already conflict.
Oh, so this is a good one, right? And I see this a lot also through coaching and through my own experience managing teams. Sometimes it's really hard to let go, right? You're like, I need to quality control everything. So one thing is absolutely you're going to be burned out. And by doing it, your team is not going to learn. And then third, when things doesn't go your way, like the outcome isn't as optimal, they will say, but you saw it. You approved it, right? So how do you really shift that mindset of accountability? I think number one is how do we start building a system that is without you reviewing? So I know this podcast is not about AI, but we're coming back to technology. Even say a piece of work, right? Now you can build a system to say, number one, it should be proofread by AI already. So there should be no language. Second, I always say, find your teammate to look another eyeball, give you some feedback. Then I should be the third pair of eyes. I should never be your first point of review. And that has really cut down my time and stress, to look at the first draft and say, what's this? Right? Why is there a typo here? Why is there this? And then you focus on the wrong things, right? Versus they went through that and then you can really take a step back and look at it holistic. And they go through this process also, their own self-auditing and also building relationship with their team to have constructive feedback.
I think for people who tend to want to see that their team is doing well, comes from a very good place because it shows me that Ryan wants to do his job well as a manager and he wants to do an excellent job and he wants his team to do well as well. And I think it's a very real thing because even for me in the past when I was in banking, I used to associate people who are not as maybe diligent in their job or not as detailed to also take it on the personal side, right? So sometimes we tend to, for kind of overachieving, let's say managers, you tend to take it personally. And I'm guilty of that too, right? But actually what I've learned now is that to separate between a person as a person, being worthy of being in your as to exist in the first place versus the competency versus the output that you expect. And if you're able as a manager to see the different parts that make up your team members, what you can actually do is understand, is it a competency issue, or is it a personal family issue at home, or is it something that the person is dealing with? Because if you start to just assume that the output represents the person's integrity, then that's when you just have all assumptions. You assume that person is bad. But if you start to break it down, then you understand if it's a competency issue, if the person is not good at taking notes, not good at Excel, not good at communication, then I can help you to enhance your skill. If it's a personal family problem at home, I can help you. What do you need? Do you need time off, right? Or if it's something you're facing personally, then it's something else. So for me, just sort of reflecting on my past in banking as well, is acknowledging that different people have those outputs, but the source of where that comes from can be very different, and we need to empathize and know where that comes from so that we can help them to solve it. And if it still doesn't work, then you take the next step.
So I want to share a story, right? So I had an ex-boss that hopefully now she's using AI and has improved all of those processes.
Ex-boss, you should be listening to this episode.
So extremely micromanaging everything everyone was doing, and micromanaging to the point that when it came to taking minutes during meetings, she must take the minutes. Because if somebody else takes it, you're not...
I'm tired just listening.
Yeah. So, I mean, which is why I say I hope that AI is now in her life and that she's doing a little bit of a backseat with the leadership. Yeah, but I can understand where all that is coming from.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ryan, please take advice of our two lovely guests today.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm, but even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below, let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show.
Okay, I'm going to jump to question 5 before we go back to 4, okay? Because we talk about overachieving managers. This person, acronym R, calls himself an overachieving reluctant manager. And he's saying that often we focus on small actions to fight fires or improve communication. I believe I'm already doing all of the above. Yet at times it feels like an endless process of canvassing for support and buy-ins to get things done. How can I better structure an environment? What systems, what tips, what actionable strategies to move people and things along and avoid him having to constantly being the one to drive teams?
Completely get that. I used to be like that too. And so I can completely empathize, right?
Because you're also the overachieving manager.
The thing is that I don't want to look at it in a bad way, because overachievers tend to do very well in their work. They tend to be, promoted faster, noticed faster by their management, right? So it's a very, very good thing. However, it depends on where that overachieving tendencies come from. And I would say that in general, what I've realized is that if it comes from a place of lack, and a lot of us have that, right? Like to prove yourself, because maybe in the past we needed to prove to our parents that, I need to get 98 on my 100% on my test, then my parents will love me, you know what I mean? Or I need to play my piano very well, then my parents will, but you actually as an overachieving manager, I would say take a step back and understand where that came from. It served you well, definitely. That's why you're a manager, right? You worked hard, you were probably very diligent, and you did very well. But where did that come from? And understanding where that come from would therefore give you empathy for yourself so that you don't need to be perfect. I don't need to prove myself all the time. But if you actually took that and say, I want to do well because I want my team to grow. I want to focus on the journey rather than I want to compete with the other team and elbow around, right? Then it becomes you won't burn out because you feel like you're coming from a good place. You want everybody to grow rather than be the first, right? I would say that's a very big learning for me, like over the past, few years, especially after moving to a startup, in that it's humbled me. You don't have to win, you don't have to be right, but you have to want to learn to grow and the team to grow with you, then the journey will be more sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, right? And what I'm hearing is you need to have that mindset shift as well, right? Otherwise it's going to keep haunting you.
Yeah.
And the person will get burned out.
And everybody gets burned out too, because it's like, wow, my managers.
I love sort of, Nicole, really, you really focus on that manager mindset shift, right? So I think you're right. Without that shift, any of the strategy that we talk about, right? Without the mindset shift, you're not going to use AI properly. Without the mindset shift, you can't ask ask the question properly. So I really love that sort of reminder about the mindset. And it's the hardest.
It's harder, yeah.
So, basically we're saying being overachieving manager mindset shift, why you got to actually not overachieve or trying to figure out where that space is coming
Yeah,
from.
exactly.
But then it's to slow down, right?
Yeah.
That's how you then slow down in order to speed up. And a lot of that is how do you take your team along this journey, right? If you feel like you're pushing your team, that means that you're behind them versus you're actually helping them to be in the same to go together. So a lot of it goes back to actually everything we talk about today, right? How do you communicate in the way they fully understand? Where are we going? Where are we going? Then how are we going to do that together? Different, whether it's age, generation, whatever, right? How are we going to do that together as a diverse team? And then I think third piece, then now you know the where and the how, of course, driving by the different mindset shift, then is to say, okay, who is going to take accountable for what to work together? I think sometimes the accountability that's missing, we know where we're going, we know how we're going to get there, but then, we're all waiting for the other person to get stuff done. So then it's getting those accountability. Then you're following up on those accountability, separated from the human. Yeah. Sometimes accountability doesn't get delivered straight away. How do we separate that, driving the feedback, and then really start thinking about it as a journey together?
I agree. I have a confession to make. I am also that overachieving manager, although this question wasn't from me. But in terms of my experience, what I've noticed is that sometimes I want to drive my teammates and the people that I manage. But there are some that can be pushed and some that cannot. So the ones who actually feel a sense of ownership, I realize those are the best people to manage because they drive themselves.
Yeah.
You hardly need to manage them,
yes,
right?
Exactly. Yes. It's just about, the regular check-ins, the KPIs, the outcomes, and the reviews. But it's the other group that's very hard. And there is also that sense of awareness of who we're working with, because if we try to push this other group too hard, they leave. And then that defeats the purpose because, we all know in HR and in any talent space, renewing and replacing is such a pain. But at the same time, what if we still wanted to keep them because they're good enough or they're great? Just that, there are some parts lacking. And from my experience, what I've noticed is to actually build in metrics of ownership for them. So I had this with one of my teammates recently because it was only after communicating with her that I realized I felt like I had to keep driving her because she expected that from me. And when I explained that, hey, you have to tell me what you want out of this career and what you're hoping to achieve. And once that conversation took place and I understood what the job meant to her, I didn't really have to drive her as much anymore.
No, that's a very good reflection.
And in fact, it was better for me because I got to let go and she stepped up because she now started to see where this was going, and it was less of reliance on me and more of her growing into the role and the person that she wanted to achieve for her own career. Sometimes this worked though. I had the same conversation with another one who basically told me a lot of big, I want this is my 1 year goal, 3 year goal, and he meant none of that. And then when I had that review with my manager and I asked her, so I did the same thing with two people. One was fabulous. Another was, he left. What did I do wrong or what can I do better? And she said this, which I thought was very profound. She said, there was nothing you could have done with him because he's the problem.
Yeah, I think whatever you said reminded me of life in that you can never change someone unless they want to change themselves, right? And I think whether that person leaves your team, like if someone gets out of your life or whatever, you can't control that and it's actually meant to, but you did the best that you could based on that person's awareness at that time and what they wanted, and then just let it flow, right? Yeah, so I actually like that reflection. It's very real. You can't control everybody, you know?
And sometimes it's best for them to leave, right? So sometimes counterintuitively, I always say, being HR, I don't believe you need to retain every single person at any time, right? In a startup, things move and change. What got you here isn't going to be the same people that bring you there is okay. But sometimes we forget, we keep trying to that's performance management, this people, let's make them even greater versus let's just sit down. Is this still the best place for you? Right. And you'd be surprised with that kind of human conversation. They might actually say, I realize this may be not the right space for me. And that's agree what that looks like, right? Versus we just keep pushing. So just because you're overachieving as a manager doesn't mean everyone has to overachieve around you.
And I think that's a great response to our overachieving and reluctant manager 32. I hope that sort of like eases some anxiety that you currently have, right? Let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, let's go by question 4, which we skipped.
So this question is from Boss 1, Manager 36. This is the question. Making everyone happy and satisfied and managing younger people, all sorts of things happen. Wait, let me read this. How is it
This
phrased?
and that all over
this
the
and that and
place.
all over the place. What might seem fine to me would have a negative response to youngsters. Okay, so maybe I will try to paraphrase this in case you don't understand the question. So he makes that effort to let everyone in the team be happy and satisfied. And most of the people that you're managing are young people, right? So many things happen.
And they perceive it negatively.
Yeah, but they perceive it negatively. So what? And of course, it is fine to him, but the youngsters perceive it negatively. I guess the question would be, what can he do better? What can he do differently? Or is he doing anything wrong?
I mean, number one, you can't make everyone happy. I mean, that is just not realistic. That's what I'm going to say. You cannot make everyone happy. So maybe it's okay.
I think that a lot of, and I resonate very much with it, because sometimes when let's say an older boss says that, it's okay what? I also been through this in the past. My teacher scold me, my boss scold me, so I take it, I can tahan, right? But actually the younger one's like, I don't want tahan, what? Why? I want to be free and I don't want to be treated like this. And actually it's a very good reflection for older bosses, because it does not mean that if you tahan it in the past means the younger generation needs to tahan it too. Because just imagine, how would you want your children to actually grow up? Like, would you treat them in the same way, right? So I would say that it's a self-reflection thing. And I've been guilty of that too. Like, why did I manage to tolerate it in the past? Did the younger generation not manage to tolerate it? But I think when they respond to you and say, hey boss, I don't think it's right. I don't think that you should actually call me out that way. Actually, it's to take a pause and think about, actually, is it true? Would I actually want to be treated that way in the past 10 years ago in the first place? Or is it because my peers, my culture, my generation taught me that that was okay to be scolded? And would you actually want to be scolded? If the answer is truly, deeply no, then actually the younger generation is pulling up a mirror to you to say, hey, maybe that you can improve, maybe things can change, maybe you don't have to repeat those same behaviors again. So actually, it's a very real and good question, and it's a very good self-reflection moment to actually say, I can be different if I choose to, and maybe I can be a different boss to the younger generation and to set a better example, and I don't have to be the same as the rest.
So, boss 1, the problem is you.
No. I mean, to double down, right? Like at the end of the day, it's actually not about how we want to manage the next generation. It's just how do we want to manage. So if it's about example of like, scolding people, you wouldn't scold any generation anyway, right? So I think it's not less or so, but if anything coming at to bring more practical for you, boss 1, and is that I think it's about transparency of ways of work, right? And I think scolding is a one extreme example, but sometimes the language, right? The language that you use. But I've noticed even now, the definition of like work-life balance, it's a very broad one. Like I have teams I do not respond after 6 p.m. This is my work hour, right? And I can see how for some managers, not committed. How can you do this? I'm going to ding you in your performance management. Rather than that, it's being really clear with your team, right? I respect the boundary, but occasionally if we do have a deadline, I'm going to get you to help me, but, then you get some extra time off. It's having set those boundaries up front, have those transparent conversation before things happen, right? If you don't say anything and all of a sudden you're like, no, tonight you're going to work till 9 p.m., I don't care. They're like, I have plans, I have life, versus let's plan for it, have the conversation. And, again, I think sometimes people are not happy. Maybe it's not just being asked to stay, it's actually how you approach it, right? So scolding, maybe it's not so much the fact, maybe it's constructive feedback, but not being presented in the right way. The what and the how, how do we sort of manage those?
Actually, the point you made about the working hours, it's a very good one because it's no right or wrong. Like let's say I'm okay to send emails at 9-10 p.m. Someone else might be not. Actually, it's a very real thing. But I want to speak out on the behalf of the employees as well. I think it's about alignment, meaning that if Alex likes to send emails at 10, my boss, right? If you like to send emails at 10 p.m., that's your prerogative. But if I'm an employee and it's suffocating me, then as an employee, you need to know that we are not aligned. And therefore, maybe this is not the right boss for you or not the right company because you cannot change the other person. And if it's suffocating, imagine every day your boss expecting you to reply 10, 11, midnight. How do you feel? It's so tiring, so draining. And if you feel that your boundary is 6 p.m., right? Then attract or look for a boss that would also align 6 p.m., right? Yeah, rather than suffocate because it's very draining.
Yeah. The transparency at the hiring stage, right? Rather than trying to remanage those once you start working. I think you're absolutely right. It's much better. But that also requires leaders to have the self-awareness to have those conversations up front, right? To share with the team my preferred ways of work, my effectiveness. For example, I definitely send late emails and ping, but I tell my team, do not respond. I said I'm a bit old lah. I send it now so I won't forget to send tomorrow. I know there's technology. You can schedule the time difference. Yes, I'm talking to myself right now. But, like there are times that you're like, okay, so it's much more like how do I set really clear boundaries so they understand so there isn't,
doesn't mean that I do it means you have to do it too.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Agree. All right, so we're gonna go to the last question now, and this is my favorite out of all the ones that we curated for today's episode. This question comes from a 28-year-old startup founder turned teen manager. The alias is Jamie, and his story or her story is, I started my own inbound travel company and it grew. So I started hiring industry veterans, and while they are good at what they do, it has been a nightmare getting them to change. I don't know if it's because they think I'm younger and it's driving me nuts. It sounds like it's a young startup founder, 28 years old, trying to manage industry experts from other competitors who are much older than him. This could be a very real scenario.
Like the reverse of a lot of the challenge,
the exact
right?
reverse of what we've talked about earlier, right? What would be your tips and answers to Jamie?
I mean, I have a follow-up question. I know Jamie cannot answer, but you say change, right? What do you want to change about? I mean, one thing we talk about today is that we can't actually change people. So when we say change is figuring out what is it that we want to change, I guess. And can we shift the mindset of change to mindset of learning and iteration? Right? So maybe it's getting them to think about using different ways of managing travel itinerary, I don't know, and can we do this as a way of thinking about learning? How do we impart learning and grow together rather than I want to change you to do the way that I want? And again, this actually is cross-generation. It's not just one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very real scenario. In fact, I think first of all, she needs to give herself a pat on the back that she's a very young founder who has the ability to hire industry veterans. That's number one. I think two is it's her own path to learn, meaning that there are different types of industry veterans. And you need to find out what are they good at. Are they good at sales? Are they good at client relationships? Then it's to acknowledge and be transparent that as a founder, no one is perfect, right? Industry veterans also, you're good in this, but you may not be good in something else. And as a founder as well, to be humble enough to say, I'm good. I started this company. This is what it means to me, what is important. But at the same time, I'm also not perfect. Therefore, are we going to help each other? Because it is very real that some industry veterans do have that more, diva-ish kind of like, you think, I have so many clients.
I've been here for 30 years. Eat more rice than your salt. No, eat more salt than your rice.
But however, it's a choice, like as in, I think for founders as well, you struggle between how do I get more sales quickly, and then how do I actually also manage the culture? I think what she's looking for is the culture fit as well, what she represents, right? And I think at the end she needs to make a choice. Do I want a quick win where I get industry veterans that may have some diva-ish attitude and you live with it? So is competency more important, or is the culture fit more important, or is it the balance, right? And if culture fit is more important for you, then maybe you have to deal with maybe less experience or whatever, salespeople that have a better fit, but maybe take some time to build out their client relationships, right? But I think it's very nuanced. You need to be very transparent, what I don't have and what you can help me with, and whether there's alignment in the vision. It's not so easy because there's a lot of ego and that kind of thing. But it's a journey she has to go on and to figure out whether it's the right fit.
Yeah, and building on that point, I feel like maybe what Jamie should have done differently is to try and create what that culture or articulate on what that culture looks like to her, what she expects. So that when she was hiring these people at the interviewing stage, she could share that. And if they're aligned, then get them in. So you get competency and culture. But if she did not do that, and it just suddenly sounds like she maybe didn't, then in this case, Jamie would need to think, do I want the competency and build the culture later? Because implementing it at this stage could potentially mean some of these people might leave.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good point. But what I wanted to share as well as a hiring manager before as well, is that as much as you can interview someone in the interview and share everything and say, this is what I believe in and what I value, when the person comes on board, a very different story. It could be very different because some people are really good at interviews, right? And they can showcase and, impress people.
They say
and
whatever it is to get the job.
Even for someone who's very good at feeling energy, sometimes I may not know who that person really is, and I will only know when they come on board. And it's okay. It's okay to sort of make those choices and then later on say, okay, is it the right fit for me? And do we then, take the next step?
But I think also going back to how do we shift from this idea of I'm a young founder, I have to manage versus how do I partner? Especially with veterans, especially with experiences. If we keep focusing on managing, then we start going into this micromanagement space, right? Versus how do we partner? How do we figure out to partner? And recognizing this question, I think being veteran, they are experienced. They're going to come in with some baggage, right? That's
of
part of
course.
it. And that's the beauty of hiring people who are more experienced, right? So I think that's number one is shifting that to partner. I think second, I want to make a quick comment about culture, right? Because we sometimes think we're hiring for a culture that we want. We think about the things that we want versus culture, the way I define it, is the worst behavior that you will tolerate, right? So culture is not what you do. The nice things that you do is actually the things that you let slide in the organization that define the culture, right? So again, for example, this culture, you can't say if 10 out of 12 people come to the office on time, but 2 people always late, your culture is actually people come to work late because you let it happen. So the idea, the culture is more about defining the behavioral boundaries, right? So for example, a veteran, a behavioral boundary could be when we're in a sales team together, you do not override my decision as the young founder if I'm talking to a new partner, right? That's that definition, finding the boundaries of partnership, could be a better way to both think about that veteran partnership relationship and building a culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I've never
Culture
heard
is the
of
little
that.
things, not the parties you throw in the pantry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not the
wow.
nice, we are a collaborative culture, high-performing culture, right? We all say the same thing, but when you go in, is those things
Yeah,
that you
every
let-
small
yeah.
thing that you say in a meeting makes up your culture.
Right,
Absolutely.
makes sense.
I
And
like
to
that.
Jamie, I think also when I was reading this question, right, what couldn't help but notice is the fact that she, as a young startup founder, was able to attract these people to work for her in
It's
the
a
first
great
place.
thing.
Yeah, it's a great thing to
Yeah.
have more confidence.
Yeah, it's a great
Reshape
thing.
to partnership, look at the culture, what do you want to let slide versus what the ideal looks like, and have confidence in yourself because these people chose to work for you. There is something there already that they like and want to be in.
And that's the last question for today.
Yes.
Maybe we can go around with some takeaways or learnings, right? And since I asked that question, I'll start.
I need to think about it.
So I think for me, it's really 2 things, right? The last one, which you mentioned, Susan, the culture is the behaviors that you do not want, right? Within an organization. Most of the time, I'm always thinking, what are the behaviors that are positive and good, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is using AI to set up processes, right? To actually help you understand the whether it's age group differences or intergenerational differences. At the end of the day, it's to communicate better and to be more productive. These were the 2 takeaways for me.
I think for me, I would go from the perspective of a burnout manager. So it's really about trying to get the other people's buy-in. So the managers, usually we feel like we have to take on everything and we're responsible for everything. But pass some of that ownership down and say, let them set the direction. Let them ask you for things. And hopefully the ones that will be self-driven, that's stuff off our plates. And for those that we can't, then we might need to put in a bit more effort as managers, but at least we now know better where to put our energy in.
I think my biggest sort of takeaway or great reminder is as managers, when we're in this time of feeling stress and, crisis, is really focusing on what we can influence, which is our own reflection, and also how do we use tools and strategies that we can build to actually support us. So remember to take the control back, right? Like the burnout is not out of your control. The team conflict is not out of your control.
The happiness.
Yeah, exactly. All this is actually in your control. So that's focus on things we can control. Like asking great question in the podcast, right? It's a great way you can control, learn different things, but really regain that control to help you to move forward.
I think for me, it's everyone in a corporation wants to be a manager. They see it as a promotion. But actually to be a very good manager means to be a better version of yourself, not actually to have a better version of other people. Because only when you become a better version of self can you be a better partner to your team. And I think there were so many topics and questions about intergenerational communication or different age groups. But I think that one is to drop all the labels and the preconceived judgment of anyone regardless of their age and generation, because only then will we unblock the barriers of what we could achieve with our team and with different people. So
I love it. So to all managers who are facing burnout, who are dealing with generational divides or different age groups in your teams, we hope that this episode has helped to give you more clarity and some answers to help you guide yourself on the journey. It's about guiding yourself first before your team. And with that, we've come to the end of the episode. Thank you, Susan and Nicole, for joining us. And Alex.
And if you're not already following us, our email updates, go to www.thefinancialcoconut.com and put in your email address so you can be updated when we launch new episodes.
And of course, if you have more questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. They might form a future episode, you'll never know. And you can also put in your alias if you don't want people to know who you really are, but don't be shy about these questions. We're here to address them. And with that, thank you for joining us. We'll see you back on another episode of Wise and Shine.
And manage who.